The views and opinions expressed in Cold and Missing are exclusively those of the hosts. All parties mentioned are considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Cold and Missing also contains adult themes and languages. Listener discretion is advised.
I'm your host, Ali McLaughlin-Solkowski.
And I'm your co-host, Eli Solkowski.
And this is Cold and Missing, where we cover cold cases
and missing person cases.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cold and Missing. I'm your host, Ali.
And I am your co-host, Eli.
Welcome back, honey.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be back here. The last couple of episodes where I haven't been on, you've really taken our podcast in not a different direction, but something new with having an interview style episode. And I didn't know if maybe you wanted to take a moment to speak on that before we get going on this new case, what that's been like for you and the folks you've been speaking with, just a recap of last week's episode.
Yeah. I mean, it's always an honor to work with anybody of the missing and murdered and to be trusted with their story. So I was very honored when Peter and Paige agreed to work with me and be interviewed with me. So thank you again to Peter and Paige. And we're really hoping that the podcast will get to Melissa and she's able to get all the messages from her family and come home if that's what she wants to be doing. So we're really hopeful. And of course, we'll keep you all updated with anything that we hear, anything from the family as far as all that goes. So yeah. But always an honor to work with the families and friends. So if, again, I usually do this at the end of the show, but if you want a case that you want covered on Cold and Missing, you can always reach out to us and we'll get in touch and we'll work.
Well, it's been just incredible to watch you work and navigate this podcast, that I've seen grow from, a little small seed to this, magnificent tree that it's become. Another thing that's been just incredible to watch is the correspondence you have with these families or loved ones of folks who are maybe missing or with cases that have gone cold. It's true community engagement to me, especially when I hear you talking to the families and really learning who these people are or who they were. But yeah, that was what I wanted to just contribute on my end, that it's really changed my perspective on how a podcast can function, including how it can function on a very community, close, and personal level. But with that said, we have a cold case this week.
That's right. We are back onto cold cases.
All right. Would you like to take it away?
Yeah, let's do it. So just as a bit of a content warning at the top, this case does have mentions of sexual assault. Today, we are going to be talking about the cold case of Carmen Van Huss, and this takes place in March of 1993 in Indianapolis, Indiana. But first, a little bit about Carmen. Carmen is 19 years old in 1993. She lived on the far north side of Indianapolis. Carmen's life had not been easy. Her parents had divorced when she was younger, and she ended up living with her aunt and uncle. Carmen also dropped out of high school, but had gotten her GED and was determined to take control of her life. In 1993, Carmen is working as a server at a Pizza Hut restaurant in Indianapolis. She had just moved into her apartment in October, about 8 months before this, and she lived with a roommate in a 2-bedroom, 3rd-story apartment. Her stepmother, Sherry Van Huss, says, quote, "She was a really good girl. The whole family loved her. She never created any problems." End quote. And now a timeline of events. On Monday, March 22nd, 1993, Carmen has had a tough day with her family. They spend the day and evening at the hospital with Carmen's grandmother, who was ill and nearing the end of her life. At around 10 p.m., Carmen gives her youngest brother and father a ride back to her father's South Side apartment in Indianapolis. She drops them off around 10:30. She tells her dad that she's going home to do some laundry. She needed to wash her Pizza Hut uniform since she worked the next day. This is the last time her family will see her. At around 11:30, so this is around an hour after she left her father's place, neighbors heard Carmen arrive at her far north side apartment. Neighbors heard Carmen walking in the hallway. They could hear her laughing and talking with a man as the two entered Carmen's apartment. The next day, Tuesday, March 23rd, in the morning, neighbors complained to building management about noises coming from Carmen's apartment around 1 a.m. They thought they heard someone yell, quote, "Get off me, get off me," end quote, and then footsteps leaving the apartment. None of the neighbors at the time called police during the night. Instead, they just waited till morning to complain to management. Management does leave a noise complaint on Carmen's door. Carmen is scheduled to work at Pizza Hut, but she doesn't show up for her shift and she doesn't call in either. The next day, Wednesday, March 24th, Carmen was scheduled again to work at Pizza Hut and didn't show up for the second day in a row. This started to give coworkers pause, and they dig into their files to find Carmen's emergency contact, which is her father, Jim. Her family thought it was out of character of her to miss work without saying anything, so her father decides to head to her apartment to check on her after he tries to call her several times and she doesn't pick up. Her father arrives around 7:30 at the Turtle Creek North Side Apartments. Carmen's father, Jim, finds the noise complaint attached to the front door. And when he knocks on the door, nobody answers. He finds that the front door to his daughter's apartment is unlocked. He lets himself inside. When Carmen's father enters the apartment, he finds a nightmare. He finds Carmen dead on the floor of her bedroom. She had been stabbed several times and was only partially dressed. 911 is called immediately. When police arrive, they start processing the scene. It's obvious that there was a bit of a struggle in the apartment. It appeared that everything was still in the apartment, however, nothing of note was missing. Carmen's purse is found in her roommate's car that was parked near the apartment. Her roommate, however, was out of town in Arizona at the time of the murder. Police initially are not forthcoming with how Carmen died. We do know now that she died because of stab wounds. In later years, however, police will theorize that the murder weapon was either a pocket knife or a screwdriver. The day after the discovery of Carmen's body, this is Thursday, March 25th, the police start rounding up several people to question, including several ex-boyfriends. Police don't have any clear suspects at this time. Carmen's autopsy is also conducted, where it's confirmed that she was sexually assaulted. Just 6 days after her murder, on Sunday, March 28th, Carmen is laid to rest. Her family asks that people make donations to the Humane Society to honor her love of animals. Carmen was someone who would bring home stray kittens in the neighborhood to take care of. While at the funeral, Carmen's father gets a phone call that his mother, Carmen's grandmother, had passed away while at the hospital. On April 1st, Carmen's family uses the local media to ask for the public's help in the form of donations for not only a reward for information leading to the arrest of whoever killed Carmen, but to also help offset the cost of the unexpected funeral, essentially a GoFundMe of the day. The family not only lost Carmen, but they also lost Carmen's grandmother. This left the family having to pay for 2 funerals pretty unexpectedly. A family friend that set up the fund said, quote, "The family suffered a lot because of all of this. It added an extra expense they didn't expect. I asked if they mind if I set up a trust fund in her name," end quote. People from the community do come forward and donate to help the family. After this, though, I couldn't find any real updates on the case. The next update that I could find comes in April of 2002. So that's 9 years since Carmen's murder. Carmen is included with other murder victims from the state of Indiana at the State House in an art installation. Carmen's mother, Andrea Wolf, was at the ceremony, but she told reporters how deeply sad she still is about the death of her child. There's been no real movement on the case. In May of 2013, the local newspaper is running a series about cold cases in Indiana, and Carmen's case is included in the series. It's here in 2013 that police confirm for the first time that Carmen was sexually assaulted during her murder. And police also have narrowed down the window to between 1 and 1:30 a.m. for when the crime took place. So this is right around the time that the neighbors heard all those noises and the fight coming from Carmen's apartment. Police also mentioned that a neighbor saw someone running from Carmen's apartment. And there are other reports that neighbors heard someone running down the hallway shortly after they heard the fight. In April of 2014, so this is that next year after the local media ran their series, a detective within the Indianapolis Police Department decides to reopen Carmen's case with the hope that advances in DNA technology would be able to solve the case. Detective Sergeant William Carter is not a homicide or cold case detective. He is actually a part of the nuisance and abatement unit. But he had been looking into cold cases in his spare time and had solved a cold case just the year before and had received recognition from the police department for doing so. Police had already determined that Carmen's boyfriend at the time of her murder was out of town, so he was not a suspect. Family and friends suspected an ex-boyfriend of Carmen's for a long time, but investigators had determined that he was traveling at the time of the murder and not in Indianapolis, so therefore he was also ruled out. Furthermore, DNA left at the scene had also been able to rule these men out in later years. Police do believe that Carmen knew her killer. Detective Carter points to the fact that neighbors heard her talking and laughing when the two of them arrived at her apartment. The scene inside suggested that they had eaten some late-night fast food and had a few beers together. Detective Carter believes that the man who murdered Carmen would have been in her circle of friends and at the time of the murder was not suspected for whatever reason. Police theorize that this could have been a platonic friend or maybe even a secondary friend in her life, maybe somebody that she didn't know well that she just decided to hang out with. Detective Carter continues to work on this case into 2015. In February of that year, so it's been almost 22 years since Carmen's murder, and Detective Carter thought that a new DNA test would be able to give him a lead to solve Carmen's case. He thought that the DNA test would narrow down the suspect pool. He requested funding from the city to send the evidence to Utah for the lab to perform since local labs couldn't do the test. The city approved the testing. However, the crime lab sent the wrong DNA to the lab for testing. They sent a sample of Carmen's DNA to the lab to be tested, not the suspect's. When Detective Carter went back to the city to ask for the funds to resend the test, he was denied. The city said they lacked the money that was needed for the second test. Still determined to get the correct DNA tested, Detective Carter started a GoFundMe to crowdsource donations to cover the cost of testing. Within 7 hours after putting up the request, the community comes together and exceeds the goal for the money requested. However, right after securing the money, the Indianapolis police take Detective Carter off of the case, and it's unclear if officials will approve the DNA being sent out. This infuriates the family. Her brother Jimmy, who was only 15 years old when his sister was murdered, says, quote, "This is insane. This is ridiculous. Something has to be changed if this is how the police department is going to run. It just makes no sense." End quote. The police say that Detective Carter fundraising was not the issue. Instead, police said that Detective Carter was removed since he was not a cold case detective. Quote, "We just want to make sure that people stay in their lanes. We have cold case investigators and we want to let them do their job." End quote. The family is firm that they want Detective Carter to remain on the case. He is the only detective that the family has heard from in the past few years and the only one who has made any recent movement on Carmen's case. After this shitstorm is brought on, for lack of a better term, that was created by police taking Detective Carter off of the case and all of the negative press, the community reaches out, the family, they start a petition to get Detective Carter back on. The next day, police hold a press conference to say that Detective Carter will remain on the case. Police say that they have no idea where people got the idea that he was being removed from the case. Indianapolis Police Chief Richard Height says, quote, "Sometimes people assume things they hear. I can tell you that the deputy chief never brought that to me that he wanted to remove anyone." When reporters press further, because the police were pretty firm that they were taking him off the case, the police chief does say that maybe Detective Carter was told to temporarily stop working on the case. Police go on to say that Detective Carter will assist the cold case detectives. Another officer, Major Chris Bailey, when asked if Detective Carter should be allowed to continue to work on the case, said, quote, "He probably shouldn't be. It should be the case investigator." End quote. Police also say that all of the money donated for the DNA testing would be returned. Police said that they don't believe the test would hold up well in court and that they mistakenly approved paying for the first one to begin with. Truly, after this drama with Detective Carter being kicked off and the fundraising money being returned and all of that, that was the last update I could find on Carmen's case. So with that, if you know anything about the murder of Carmen Van Huss in March of 1993, please call either Crime Stoppers of Central Indiana at 317-262-8477, the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department at 317-327-1270, or the FBI ViCAP at 1-800-634-4097. And the sources for the timeline today come from the FBI, the Indianapolis Star, and the Indianapolis News. So that is the case of Carmen Van Huss.
My first reaction to Carmen's case is how truly colossal of a loss of one person's life can be in an instance like this where someone is viciously murdered. Like the ripple effect it can have in that loved one's life, and that one person making this horrible, evil decision, that it not only ends the life of the person, the victim, but it ends other people's lives or parts of their lives forever. That one decision can create just massive collapse in a family. And I feel like that is so present in this family. It was heartbreaking to listen to. Yeah, that's really where I hung in the heaviness of listening to this, because I couldn't believe what it did to this poor family after her loss, and then her grandmother, Carmen's grandmother.
Yeah, it's absolutely devastating, the ripple effects that a murder has on every family. But like here, you could really see that happening in real time. Like her grandmother was ill, but I'm sure none of this helped anything.
I'm so grateful that you brought this to the front of our minds, because as I was counting in my head when you said 93, I think I was like, oh, that was like 10 years ago or 20 years ago, because, your mind does that as you get older. And I realized it was a little 31 years old now-ish. And I think it's a case that's completely solvable. I wanted to get your more of your thoughts and comments on this, but I also agreed with law enforcement that it was probably someone that she knew, even if it wasn't like first tier, close friends, maybe second or third, like acquaintance or someone she had seen out at the bar or whatever, someone that she knew enough to let him into her apartment.
No, I had the same reaction when I started researching this case. I think it's completely solvable. I do agree that I think she knew her murderer for all the same reasons that, police pointed out, that she was heard like laughing with this person and talking with them. And for the reasons that you pointed out, she felt comfortable enough to invite them into her apartment, and they were eating some fast food, like sharing a beer. Like it seems like a pretty casual hang, just like a late night hang, So yeah, I think it's somebody maybe not in her close friend circle. I almost wonder if she ran into somebody from her childhood or something, and was like, how are you? Let's catch up. Do you want to come hang out? Her grandmother was really sick. Maybe she was just looking for some company, to pass the time, to kind of distract herself a little bit. And she ran into somebody that she kind of knew and was just great, let's hang out. This will distract me for a little bit, and then I'll go to bed and I'll work tomorrow and, repeat. But then this guy might have just gotten the wrong idea. We do know that Carmen had a boyfriend who was out of town. So I don't think she was like looking for, like a physical comfort in any form. I think the person who was invited over got the wrong idea.
I mean, I would even go as far to say he didn't get the wrong idea. He just made a decision about what the interaction was. And I didn't think that the prior statement was victim blaming in any way, but I also just like want to speak on how I think how cool it is that Carmen was really trying to carve out a space in the world for herself at such an adult age, but a young age, like an apartment on your own and like a stable job and trying to turn your life around. I think that that's incredible. I think it's incredible when anyone tries to do it at any age, but this young woman who was struggling, like, I think it was an incredible gift that she gave to herself, that it was to try in her life and to try to like give herself a happy journey in the world. I'm so sad that it was taken much, much, much too soon, that her journey was cut short, but it seems like she left quite the impression on the world and her family.
Well, some questions that I have in this case, what's happening with the case today? There was all this momentum happening in 2013, 2014, and there hasn't been any updates on the case that I could find since then, since this like kind of drama within the police department, which just as an outside observer just seems like a lot of ego getting caught up in what was happening. Like, just feels like a bunch of ego. But a question that I would just have today is like, what are we doing today? Because we know we have DNA. So what are we doing? What's being tested? What hasn't been tested? What's happening in the case today? Because it does seem very solvable. We have DNA. We've been able to eliminate some suspects, and it's somebody that was known in her life. It feels like if we just like really dug back into interviewing her friends, interviewing her family, interviewing her roommates, like her coworkers, somebody might pop up that didn't a few years ago, or 30 plus years ago, I guess now.
Yes, this was like a whole other section that I had questions and comments on. And to echo you, like, it also, outside of like it being a total ego situation, I was thinking to myself, this is just like a lot of bumbling and backtracking. It just looked bad. Like, I just didn't understand what was happening at all. And then my second immediate thought was, are you all trying to cover for someone? Like, was this someone who was in law enforcement? That was like also where my brain went. And granted, I know that that's maybe not at the top of the list of what probably happened, but when you're doing shit like that, like of saying like we shouldn't have even invested the money in the first place on testing whatever, like, I don't know, like you're really taking the arrow and trying to point it away from yourself, but like the light just gets brighter and brighter and brighter. It definitely didn't help me have any sort of more confidence in their work.
Yeah, and just the fact that there hasn't been any updates or any kind of work that seems to have been done. Like, I couldn't see anything that the family was saying that was being done, anything in media that was saying that was being done. So it just seems like you got mad that this guy was like solving cold cases, told him to back off. The family didn't want it. It turned into this, bad media press. So you backtracked, but it still seems like he's off the case because nothing's happening with it. So the people who are ultimately suffering are the victim's family, who have suffered the most in this. And it's like they're the ones who are getting jerked back and forward and like getting caught up in people's egos. And it's just like, let's just close it. That should just be the goal. And there's also a part of me, just as like somebody who has a job, like if someone came up to my desk and was like, hey, I'm going to take this thing away from you and try to do it, I'd be like, okay, great, go.
Yeah, the end goal there, I think, in doing that job, that should always be the case of anyone who is working in that capacity of solving these cases, especially law enforcement, that if your work colleague comes up to you and says like, hey, I think I have like an answer, I think unanimously, everyone should always say go for it, even if it wasn't what you thought of to begin with. Like, this isn't about you. Your ego in that job should absolutely 100% always be checked at the door. And we know that it very rarely is. But, like, I did have the feeling of, like, it seems like this person wants to do good with the power that they have and immediately was cut off from doing so. It was, I, like, couldn't believe that that it was happening, and it was publicized, and that everyone knew, and that it was just like do and nothing happened from it.
Yeah, that's really kind of what happened. Exactly that. And I had the same reaction. I was like, oh, this guy who's like, he has free time, he's working on the taxpayer's dollar. Like, yeah, like, go get some more work. Go close some cold cases. And he did. Like, he had done it already. And like, the department like gave him an award. And it just seems like the cold case investigators were mad that was happening. So nothing has happened with Carmen's case since about 2015 when that testing was requested.
I guess my future hope now in, us putting out an episode like this, maybe other podcasts will hear about it and they also do their own investigation and we start circulating her name, case, and story more.
Yeah, I absolutely hope this case is solved. It does seem solvable. I know we're 30 years out from the event, but it does seem solvable. So I really hope that happens. And I hope that Carmen's family get the answers that they are looking for and somebody has to answer for what they did to Carmen and ending like a very promising life so early. If you know anything about the murder of Carmen Van Huss in March of 1993, please call Indiana Crime Stoppers of Central Indiana at 317-262-8477 or the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department at 317-327-1270, or you can call the FBI ViCAP at 1-800-634-4097. And of course, we will be putting pictures of Carmen on our Instagram this week. So please, if you're not, follow us there as well. And we also post about current cases that are happening, just in the media in our stories. So it's a great resource just to stay up to date on what's happening. Before you leave your podcast player or this page, if you could, please rate and review us. If you're an Apple podcast, writing us a written review is so helpful. But if not, a 5-star, a thumbs up, whatever the metric is in your platform, we do appreciate it. If you're looking for more episodes or want to search or whatever, you can go to our website, www.coldandmissing.com, and there you'll find transcripts if you or someone you love is hard of hearing and wants to follow along that way. You'll also find links to all the platforms that you can listen on, so you can find us on your favorite podcast player. But that is all I have. Thank you again so much for listening to Cold and Missing. It's always an honor to be a part of your week. I'm your host, Ali.
And I am your co-host, Eli.
Have a great week and stay safe, y'all.
Stay safe, y'all.